Hey, y'all, it's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. So glad to have you with us today. Show gets started in just a moment. It's Jeff Sentell today. As a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update, we'll get some UGA recruiting news for him. That's fun. Late in the program today, we'll take a longer look at Nakobe Dean and Nolan Smith, two very impressive freshman linebackers of the Dogs. We'll try to figure out how they may factor into the Dogs' defense here in 2019. And off the top of the program, I was in kind of a geeky mood this morning, so I did a little bit of a deep dive about how Georgia could perform in the 2020 draft and what that could mean for the Dogs on the field. What do the results of all this research mean? I'm honestly not sure. We'll try to decide next as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I was in a pretty geeky mood this morning, which many of you, including the folks that work with me, would probably say could describe me as every morning, which is probably fine. I'm okay with that description being used for me. But nonetheless, I was in a geeky mood this morning. So I have been kind of contemplating this for a little while and actually kind of dug in and did a little research this morning. And I got to tell you something. You ever do like a lot of work on something only to be left with results that are kind of disappointing? This is one of those examples where I thought that I was going to find something that all of you would find really, really cool, and you would all say, wow, BA, thanks for telling me that. But upon further review, maybe none of this really matters all that much, but I still think it's a fun conversation. Let me tell you where the genesis of this came from. Charlie Potter, an Alabama reporter, works for 24/7 Sports, was watching the NFL draft. He saw on the screen they throw up Mel Kiper's, it's never too early to start talking about this, big board for the 2020 draft. We've written about this at DawgNation.com too, I think. By now you may be aware of this, that when you look at the big board for the 2020 draft, in fact, for those of you watching on video, I'll show this to you, you see two names from the Georgia Bulldogs on here. Now, Georgia's not the only school with two names on here. Tua Tagovailoa and Jerry Jeudy, both from Alabama, in the 1 and 2 spot. But Georgia does have two names. It's offensive tackle Andrew Thomas. It's quarterback Jake Fromm. Now, I started kind of wondering. I wonder how frequently it is we've seen teammates end up being top 10 picks in an NFL draft. Now, it's probably worth pointing out for the people who care more about the NFL draft than I do. I think these early projections, even from the guys like Kiper and McShay that do this stuff for a living, the early projections on a lot of this kind of stuff, I would think people would say have been notoriously wrong over the years. That's what I'm going to think people are going to say. But this is the best guess that we have at this time, and Kiper's been doing this for a million years. So let's just assume as a hypothesis, as the smart kids like to say, that Kiper's right, and both Andrew Thomas, Georgia's left tackle, and Jake Fromm, Georgia's quarterback, both end up going in the top 10 of the NFL draft. Well, how frequently has that happened? Well, I did a little research on this, and here's what I can tell you. Since 2010, which dates back now, 10 NFL drafts, we've seen 19 quarterbacks taken. We've seen 12 offensive tackles taken. But only once over the course of the last decade have teammates done this. Now, you may be wondering, well, who are the teammates that were selected in the top 10 of the NFL draft? You got to go back to 2010 when Sam Bradford, a quarterback, and Trent Williams, an offensive tackle, were taken from the Oklahoma Sooners. They actually ended up having, I want to say, 3 of the top 4 picks in that year's draft or whatever. So that's, I guess, in and of itself kind of interesting. Georgia's actually never had teammates be drafted in the top 10. It's had multiple first-round picks a few times. The closest it's come to having 2 top 10 picks would have been the 2009 draft, the year Stafford went number 1 overall and Noshawn Marino went number 12 overall. That's the closest Georgia's had to having top 10 picks. So all of this up to this point you may be saying is pretty interesting. But here's where I think my research kind of falls apart. I guess the thing that kind of disappoints me a little bit in this, thinking about what Georgia could do in the 2020 draft, is what matters to me on this show the most, and I think what matters to most of you is we want Andrew Thomas to get his money. We want Jake Fromm to get his money. We love seeing the guys like DeAndre Baker who are going to get their money now to be drafted in the first round. But what we really care about is the results on the field. Well, according to this sort of stack of research I've done, being first-round picks, top 10 picks, has not necessarily contributed to winning for the teams they played on as much as I might think. In fact, those two teammates, Trent Williams and Sam Bradford, were drafted in the 2010 draft. The 2009 Oklahoma team, which is the last one they played on, the team went like 8-5. They had, I want to say they had 4 first-round picks, 3 in the top, I forget what it was, top 3, or top 4, top 5, something like that. They went 8-5. Now, that Oklahoma era had some good teams. That just didn't happen to be one of them. Same way with the offensive tackles. Like this year, Jonah Williams was taken number 11 overall. That was obviously a playoff team. But the year before that, Mike McGlinchey, Notre Dame, pretty good team, but not a great team. Go back to before that, 2016, Ronnie Staley from Notre Dame, good, not great. Jack Conklin, Michigan State from that same year. I think that was a playoff team the previous year. But then it's like Brandon Scherf from Iowa, Eric Flowers from Miami. A lot of these top 10 picks don't end up actually contributing to winning on the field as much as you might think. But I think it would still be overall good for Georgia if this could indeed happen, because this is one of those things where Georgia's already set up to be pretty good. So if you could just add an even better season from Andrew Thomas and an even better season from Jake Fromm, you might set yourself up for a little more success in that regard. And for what it's worth, even with all this early attention being paid to where Andrew Thomas might be drafted, where Jake Fromm might be drafted, there is some evidence to suggest that these two guys are doing a pretty good job of compartmentalizing that. Especially Thomas. I mean, listen, at the beginning of the spring practice, I looked Andrew Thomas right in the eye and say, do you realize that you might be a top 10 pick by the end of next spring? If somebody was about to write me an 8-figure check, that's all I'd ever be thinking about. But for Andrew Thomas, he says, no, I got business to take care of before that comes around. In fact, here's what Andrew said about that.
I try not to pay too much attention to it. I feel like it's just a distraction. I can't, be complacent. I got to continue to work because that's the only way I can get to where I want to be.
Listen, don't you love that word? And doesn't that one word, complacency, he says, I don't want to be complacent. Doesn't complacent just end up describing the haves and the have-nots in college football, the teams that achieve the highest level, the teams that miss out on that, the players that achieve at a higher level, they find their full athletic potential, the players that don't? Isn't complacency, and it doesn't end up being a major difference maker when it comes to stuff like that? Andrew Thomas says, I ain't worried about the draft. I don't want to be complacent right now because I got business to take care of in the uniform that I'm wearing right now. And I do love that. And it kind of leads you to the conversation of, for both these guys who could be top 10 picks, Fromm and Thomas, what do they got to do to get to that point? Well, for Jake Fromm, Kirby Smart addressed this pretty openly during the spring practice. This is a different situation for him at quarterback than it's been before. Taking that next step as a quarterback, as a player, leading Georgia to where it has not gone, putting himself on a plane that he has not been. This spring, leading the summer, is an important time for that. And for Kirby Smart, he kind of joked about this, at least I think he was kidding, back early in the spring, saying, hey, by now, Fromm's been through all of this, so he has to find that kind of intrinsic motivation to find out what it is that he doesn't know and what it is that he still needs to keep getting better with. Here's Kirby Smart on that point.
Well, that's obvious. I mean, he understands things, and there's probably times that he has to be careful that he doesn't get bored, because I know defensively he knows every call we got. He hears the call. He's already got his call. He knows what the next step is from getting their call and our call half the time. But that's part of growth, and that's part of him in kind of implementing his leadership to our offense to use the experience he has to say, you know what, we're not executing well. We went 3 and out against the 2 defense. Well, that's not who we are. And I think you see him assert himself more as he's gotten more and more comfortable with it. And he's done some good things with the ball, and you've got to make good decisions with the ball, which he's done thus far.
Another great word from Kirby, assert. Assertive. You want assertive quarterbacks. How does Fromm assert himself with this team right now, knowing that he's kind of learned a lot? How does he help other guys learn? Well, I asked Jake Fromm that question myself, and as you think about Fromm moving towards the front end of the first round of the NFL draft next season, what's a way in which he can be assertive? Well, maybe it's breaking in a new crop of wide receivers and finding a level of chemistry with them that raises their level of play and proves to the world that Fromm really does deserve to be mentioned at the top of next spring's draft. Here is Jake Fromm on that next step of developing this chemistry with this brand new bunch of Georgia wide receivers.
Yeah, reps, talking to them, getting a feel, seeing a lot of different looks from the defense. It really helps when the defense gives us their best look. And I think it really just comes down to a lot of reps, a lot of extra time watching film with those guys, seeing what they're seeing. Hey, this is what I'm seeing. It's just an ongoing back and forth. It's kind of like a conversation. And you just kind of start it that way and keep building it and keep throwing the ball.
I mean, Fromm sounds like an experienced quarterback when he says those things, and no doubt he'll take his comfort and his familiarity with the Georgia offense, and hopefully he'll use that to make the wide receivers will be playing with this year better, and also the quarterbacks who are following him behind him. Maybe he'll use that to teach them and help them grow as well. I mean, I think the overall point when you look at Fromm in the midst of this 2020 top 10 draft pick conversation is that most Georgia fans are probably not surprised to see Andrew Thomas mentioned there, but there's still a crop of Georgia fans that may be wondering, is Jake Fromm really about to take that step? Is he really about to make that move? And I think it speaks to this pocket of Georgia fans who maybe haven't always fully appreciated Fromm for what he is and Fromm for what he can do for the Georgia program. A guy that would, I think, agree with that is former Georgia quarterback David Green, who knows this position well and who has watched Fromm over the last couple of years. And when he sees Fromm, maybe he sees what a lot of these draft experts see. One of the best quarterbacks in all of college football. Here's David on that point.
Yeah, it's amazing, Brandon, how fast things change. Yeah, it used to be, I mean, heck, even when I was playing this 15 years ago, guys would come in, they typically redshirt a year and kind of get familiar with the offense and the whole deal and the speed of the game. I mean, now guys are coming in, they're ready to play, they're ready to make a difference. And it's amazing how fast things are changing. Justin Fields comes in, then he's back out, and chances that he's going to be starting at Ohio State. It's such a fast pace. The game's changed dramatically. Georgia fans, we got to pinch ourselves. I mean, it's pretty amazing what Fromm has been able to do since he's been our quarterback. I mean, taking us to the national championship as a true freshman, and just really the way he's handled himself and represented himself in the school at the quarterback position. Well, we've been pretty fortunate because he's been a consistent player for us.
You mentioned back in the year 2000, Jim Donnan's last. That's a bad edit on my part. My bad on that. But the point from David there is that when you've watched him grow and develop, you've seen a guy that's not only made himself better along the way, he's made his teammates better, and I think that's the kind of thing the draft guys will notice. And on that final point, I'm going to try to make this one pretty quickly, is that that's also the kind of thing that Andrew Thomas has done for Georgia himself. He has not just grown and developed as an offensive lineman, but he also seems to be working to develop the rest of the Georgia offensive line as well, making them better along the way. I mean, that's been one of the big pushes from Kirby Smart throughout the entirety of Thomas's career. Don't just be good, make others better. Be a vocal leader. In fact, here's an example of what Kirby has said to Thomas in the past.
The challenge for Andrew is, can he become a vocal leader, not just a leader by example? He's got to learn to push other guys and challenge other guys, and I think he can be that kind of impact leader.
But here's what I want you to listen. If you haven't, kind of followed all of this, let's kind of bring this all to a close by saying this, that it'd be one thing for Fromm and Thomas to both become top 10 picks, and that in and of itself would be good for them. But these two players are unique in the fact that they have done what Kirby Smart has just said there. Being a vocal leader, making others better as they've risen up the ranks of the football world and gotten the attention of draft scouts. They have caused a rising tide among the rest of the Georgia players as well. Let me give you a final example of this. Had a chance to talk to Isaiah Wilson not too long ago. Got a chance to ask him about watching Andrew Thomas play in 2017. Thomas played as a true freshman. Isaiah Wilson didn't. Wilson said that was an opportunity for him to do a lot of learning. And now Wilson, who became a freshman All-American last year and is a pillar on the right side of Georgia's offensive line, much the same way Georgia's Thomas is on the left side, it sounds like Wilson credits Thomas for a lot of that growth and development. So Kirby wants Thomas to be a vocal leader. Well, it sounds like he's already doing that. Here's Isaiah Wilson.
I want everybody on the team to win. I don't care who you are. If you're on this team and you're in red and black and you're wearing that G and you're out there grinding with me, I want you to win. Whatever's best for the team is what I want. My freshman year, I wasn't ready to play. I sat down and I learned how to be ready to play. In 2018, I played.
So listen, I think that when you hear Wilson say those things, I think it's pretty clear that Thomas has been a leader for Georgia. So this is not just a guy working on one day making himself a lot of money. He's also seemingly working in such a way that others can follow his example, and that's making the rest of his Georgia teammates better. I think you can say the same thing for a Jake Fromm as well. Statistically speaking, being a top 10 pick in the NFL draft hasn't always led to team success. In the case of Fromm and Andrew Thomas, I think there's a chance that they confound that, and I think there's a chance that they do kind of chart their own course when it comes to that kind of thing. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. Kind of long off the top today, but I had a lot I wanted to cover. Good to have you with us, whether you're watching live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast pretty much wherever you can find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're going to get Jeff Sentell in just a moment. We'll do a Marlowe's Tavern insider update with him. We'll get new information on some of the five-star prospects that Georgia's chasing down for its 2020 class. We'll also hear more from Georgia coach Kirby Smart. Later on, some thoughts on Nolan Smith, Nakobe Dean. We're going to dive in and where those two freshman linebackers leave off after the end of spring practice here this season. That's going to be a fun conversation. But I was also kind of watching online a little bit this week, and I saw something that was kind of interesting. Brett McMurphy is a college football writer, and I guess he's got sources there at what's known as the Las Vegas Superbook in Nevada. It's the Westgate Hotel and Casino, and they're kind of always among the first to put out really big odds. They got the preseason odds for the college football national championship out, and I was really impressed with where Georgia comes in on this. I probably won't end up being able to do all of this now, but I did want to at least show you off a little bit of this, and we'll set up a conversation. We'll have more a little bit later on the program. In fact, let me show Brett McMurphy on Twitter with the odds from what's known as the Superbook there at the Westgate. It's probably not a surprise to you that the reigning national champion is the favorite here. The reigning national champion is the favorite to win this year's national championship. Clemson is at 2-1. Alabama is at 5-2, which even I can do the math on and understand that's about 2.5-1, so slightly below Clemson on that. But how about Georgia right now? If you're watching a video, you see this. At 7-1 to win the national championship, well ahead of anybody else in the rest of the pack. Ohio State at 10-1, Oklahoma, Michigan both at 14-1, then everybody else 25-1 or worse. So Georgia is right there in that 7-1 category to win the national championship, clearly behind both Alabama and Clemson, and clearly well ahead of everybody else in college football. And it kind of leaves a Georgia fan, I guess, left to wonder, what do you do with all of this? Because it seems like what you've just done there is taking a snapshot of how the 2018 season ended, and you're saying, at least according to the folks who put their money where their mouth is, that the 2019 season is going to start off much the same way. Georgia way better than everybody else, but Alabama, the team that's beaten it the last couple of years, and Clemson, the team that's got the trophy that Georgia wants. That's one of the things that Georgia's really going to be wrestling with this year, of how does it keep its competition behind it at bay, and how does it move up and take down a team like Alabama and Clemson that has not done yet? We're going to have more on this later on in the program. I want to look at some of the things that Kirby Smart has said on this kind of stuff in the past. We'll do that a bit later on, but for now, we're kind of running a little long here. So let's get you what you want on a Tuesday. Let's get you a chance to talk to Jeff Sentell and get some recruiting information. It's great to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
You know, each week here on DawgNation Daily, Jeff Sentell gives us his twist on UGA recruiting, where the guys are going to go, what they're thinking, what's the latest. Jeff does it like nobody else, and when you want chef-inspired food with a twist, you want Marlowe's Tavern, because they also do it like nobody else. They take great care in the ingredients they use for the dishes that you love, and you need to try out the tavern right there in your neighborhood to find out for yourself what Jeff Sentell and I have been saying for quite some time. It is just one of the most satisfying meal experiences you can have. In fact, Jeff Sentell, I saw some photos from you on social media over the weekend. Looked like you enjoyed a nice Marlowe's Tavern brunch recently, which makes me very jealous.
Yeah, Brandon, my local, good morning, sir, by the way. My local Woodstock location on Sunday brunch, they have it. And this message here is basically for those who hear the phrase red velvet cake French toast.
Oh, yeah.
And don't go, oh my gosh, that's too rich for my taste. That sounds a little bit too sweet and salty, or sweet and savory for my breakfast palate. That's not for those of you. We're talking about the offensive linemen, the defensive linemen, those tight ends that want to put on about 20 pounds. When you see red velvet French toast, I mean, don't you just have to try at least a little bit of it?
Yeah, nothing sounds better to me than that right now. That sounds fantastic. And by the way, if you want to find out about the tavern close to you, the brunch options they may have, the special events or great offers they have going on, text the word Marlowe's. That's MARLOWS, no apostrophe, just MARLOWS to 24242. The number once again 24242, and you can find out about all those kinds of things. Jeff, let's also take a moment to find out some of the stuff going on with UGA recruiting. And I guess in a roundabout way, I'm a little disappointed, I guess, because it seems like the visit high from G-Day has kind of subsided a little bit, and a lot of this online chatter, which I like, has for the most part kind of quieted down. I'll give you a perfect example of this. 5-star linebacker Mikhail Sherman. You know, there's still a lot of reporter talk out there. There's a lot of prediction talk out there when it comes to Sherman. But for the most part, it seems like he individually has kind of gone radio silent here. What do you make of the latest on Sherman these days after his UGA visit?
Well, I'm sure under the online chatter category, we remind us, Brandon, we need to make that a part of Before the Edges, an online chatter section or something like that. But you noticed, Brandon, I'm sure you did, in the wake or even during his official visit to Ohio State last week, that crystal balls continue to pop up for Georgia.
That's right.
Kind of that G-Day wake of good vibes right there. And, you know, with Sherman, I have a feeling that the following is going to happen. I have a feeling now that he's seen Ohio State, he'll probably take maybe one more visit, and that will be to LSU. And let's give the Tigers due credit here. They are the hottest recruiting team in the country right now. I don't know if everybody saw Rakeem Jarrett over the weekend, 5-star wide receiver to go ahead with Jermaine Burton.
Yep.
They also have an added Antoine Sampa, who's an inside linebacker out of Woodbridge in Virginia, Woodbridge High School in Virginia. I think that young man thinks of himself as wanting to walk the Devin White path a little bit for Coach O. And right now, something is going on in Baton Rouge where they're getting a lot of recruits. And really right now, this is going to seem like the NBA playoffs a little bit or AAU basketball. Clemson is developing a super team. LSU is developing a super team. And now it's going to be which other schools are going to get into that top three and which schools can sign 21, 22, 24 guys to challenge for the nation's number one class. We all know Alabama's going to be there. We all know Georgia's going to be there. But really, if LSU, the way they're building up pieces, if Coach Bergeron can ever find himself a quarterback, some of the ones that Georgia has signed over the last few years, that team down there is going to pose a very, very big threat in the SEC West to Alabama.
Yeah, you talk about Rakeem Jarrett. I actually want to talk to you about Jarrett some more in just a moment, kind of some of the stuff that LSU is doing. And I think it's kind of interesting. You used the phrase super teams, and obviously that's what Georgia's trying to be. And as a recruiting force of the last few years, I think it's kind of gotten there. But it would seemingly be some positions more so than others. It's kind of funny for a guy like Sherman, who, as you said, the Georgia predictions were still pretty intense even while he was in Columbus. It's pretty clear that Georgia is making headway at Sherman's position in a way that it's not necessarily at other positions like defensive line. I know that's kind of a tired conversation by now. We've tread on that ground a whole bunch. But it is pretty clear that the 5-star outside linebackers like Sherman just see Georgia as a landing spot. And I'm sure some of that's, maybe most of that, maybe all of that, is about the 3-4 defense and the guys that Georgia has coaching those positions. But it's just kind of funny how Georgia seems to have that connection with Sherman and connection with linebackers, even after signing a bunch, that it doesn't always seem to be able to forge at some of the other positions right now.
I think that has a lot to do with the Georgia scheme and how they can put 4 linebackers on the field. And really most of the linebackers that Georgia has lined up for Kirby Smart have been draft picks or playmakers. And now Georgia's going to get maybe an upper echelon talent to put into a lot of those positions as well. I think the other thing that's very interesting, and I'm sure you probably got it in our show progression to talk about today, was I'm sure when you're following a lot of things, Brandon, you noticed a report by well-respected reporter Chad Simmons of Rivals.com. He spoke to 5-star defensive end Myles Murphy, and Myles Murphy basically summarized his thoughts as that late August pep rally that his good friend Tank McCullough followed to make his decision. Well, Myles Murphy is so ready to make his decision that he's moved it up to May 17th. It will be at halftime of the Cool Grove Marietta High spring game, and he feels like he's been ready to commit according to those comments for the last 2 or 3 weeks. It will come down to Auburn, Georgia, and Clemson. But if we've been following a lot of the reporting, especially a lot of that reporting coming out of the opening, where Murphy kind of told us that he feels very comfortable academically about Clemson and Auburn, still needs to check out the academics at Georgia. Well, he's ready to make a decision, and I don't think he's made a well-chronicled educational, academic side of the coin visit to Georgia since that trip. So that one right there, Brandon, you're fond of watching maybe ships or just calling him ships sailing away into the harbor.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's pretty much a pretty good pronouncement on five-star defensive end Myles Murphy and where he's likely not going to play college football.
In fact, let me show our video audience a recent tweet from Murphy where I think me and probably a lot of other people kind of take this as, when he says, who's good at making edits on pictures or videos? Jeff, I've seen that clarion call before. That typically means a young man may be ready for a commitment announcement of some kind. You referenced some of the other reporting that another site has done on that. But as a fan, which I'm going to speak as for a moment, I guess you're going to raise the white flag of surrender on that. It certainly seems like Myles Murphy has sailed down that same harbor that Brian Brzee once sailed down, and we'll soon be doing a What Went Wrong with Georgia's recruitment of Myles Murphy topic, either on Before the Hedges or DawgNation Daily One. It looks like the Murphy thing is all but over and done with now.
Well, I would counsel you, my good sir, to just remember where your mood meter was, I guess, mid-April, early April last year, when it seemed like the Owen Papos ship was definitely moving away from Georgia, despite some hard trolling a little bit, or a lot of fun a little bit by Owen, away from the Georgia recruiting class. I think you will find that the 2019 class at inside linebacker looked pretty sporty as it finally came together.
Yeah, it did, but, I mean, Jeff, I get where the fans are coming from. This comes up on our forum all the time at forum.dawgnation.com. It is kind of symbolically a bad look to have another really good-looking defensive line prospect from the state of Georgia not go to Georgia. And you can tell me all you want, well, it's a better position fit at Clemson. Based on what I feel like I understand about football, I think I would probably agree with that. It probably is a better position fit. And yet it still is not a good look for Georgia to watch, Murphy, if he ends up going to Clemson, looking very similar to Derek Brown, who spurned Georgia to go to Auburn, and look how well that's turned out for the Tigers. You start adding some of this kind of stuff up together, and you say these high-profile misses end up hurting you because in the case of a Murphy at Clemson or a Derek Brown at Auburn, not only are they not playing for you, in likely big games in the future, they're going to be playing against you.
Yeah, those will be December and January ball games for a lot of those cases right there. But, I guess, Brandon, I think the way you have to look at it is the state of the Georgia program right now. For Georgia to lose out on a Myles Murphy, we say this all the time. There's the 4-3 reason, there's the defensive line reason, there's all the things in personal preference where maybe Myles Murphy just feels more comfortable at a Clemson or even maybe an Auburn in this discussion here. But the thing to think about there is, what does Georgia not have at outside linebacker? Does Georgia have they stacked up about as many outside linebacker prospects as imaginable heading into the 2020 class? I would vote yes. I would also vote that losing Murphy is going to be tough for any program to watch him flee outside the state borders. But I think it's offset a little bit if Georgia can come back and bring in an outside linebacker, a crossover linebacker talent, like the aforementioned Mikael Sherman we just spoke about earlier in our program. I think that's, in a vacuum, losing Myles Murphy is pretty bad, or it's at least one of the things that makes you cringe your teeth a little bit if you're a Georgia fan. But when you have what Georgia has at outside linebacker stacked up, and then you have another on the way in that same class, another top 15 prospect, I think the word here is, I'm not trying to quote or bring up the name of one of Georgia's big fans off the Migos, but offset is the word that comes to mind there. Yes, Myles Murphy is a blow, but look, Georgia does not have a linebacker, an outside linebacker room devoid of first and second round talent at this time.
So let me see if I can kind of sum this up, and let me see if I can say something that you're going to agree with. I think, and we'll just keep this to defense for a moment because I think Georgia's got its own issues recruiting on the offensive side of the ball that we can address at a different time. But when you look at the defensive recruiting for Georgia, it certainly looks like that you have a situation moving forward where the 3-technique defensive linemen and kind of the 5-technique sort of classic 3-4 defensive end, that those are going to be two pretty difficult positions for Georgia to recruit. You can go out and find the diamonds in the rough like Jordan Davis, play the nose guard because, for the most part, it's hard to get those, high recruiting rankings if you're not getting a lot of stats. So you can go out and find diamonds in the rough to be your nose guard. You're just looking for a beefy dude there. but you got to have somebody somewhat athletic to stand next to that guy on the defensive line. There's just not going to be a lot of those. If you're a potential 3-4 defensive end, it seems like you're going to want to be a 4-3 defensive end or a 3-4 outside linebacker. Convincing somebody to be that 3-4 defensive end doesn't seem like the easiest thing to do. Does that line up with your way of thinking here, that those two positions, defensive tackle next to the nose guard, defensive end kind of lining up, kind of outside, those are going to be two positions for Georgia where finding guys who fit the profile for that and want to accomplish that role or fill that role in college is just not necessarily going to be easy to do?
Yeah, but I'm going to agree with a lot of what you said there, Brandon, as you thought. But I think to me it's more just taking a step back and looking at who Georgia is losing a guy like a Miles Murphy to. You're losing them to a Clemson who has stacked up the best defensive line, NFL pipeline of anyone over the last 2 or 3 years. That's really important. Miles Murphy is not going to Miami or Florida State or Ohio State. That's one thing to think about there. The other thing that I think will be just crucial for Georgia, and I think we'll have finally enough data in about 1 to 2 more seasons. Give me the 2020 season, and if you can't see guys like Malik Herring, who have went as a strong side defensive end out of the 3-4 base front to the NFL as a high draft pick, or a Brenton Cox in much the same light, and see where Jordan Davis starts looking up on NFL draft boards as well. And here's where I think the 2019 recruiting class is crucial, because you were just speaking about Georgia getting those diamonds in the rough. Well, Georgia has a true diamond who can play that twitchy 3-tech or a 5-tech in Trayvon Walker. Show me what he does in the Georgia system. Show me what Jordan Davis does. Show me what Zion Logue does. Show me what Bill Norton does. Show me what those guys do in the Georgia system now as the defensive line guys that are going to have to click for the Bulldogs in the next 2 cycles. And then we can probably take a really good look about, can Georgia get the pieces, and can Georgia progress the pieces from highly rated recruit to all SEC to high-round NFL draft pick? Because that's what Georgia's going to have to do to win this taste test with a Clemson and with an Alabama. That's much like the recruiting realm. That's much like where Georgia football is right now. I know a lot of fans are probably happy with the overall talent and the players everywhere on the team, but the thing is not much different than maybe some of Rick's peak years, at least in peak years, where Georgia is one of the 3 or 4 teams that could win it all and could beat anybody. And then here we are again with Georgia, Alabama, and Clemson, except Georgia is clearly one of the 3 best teams or 4 best teams in the country on everyone's board. If you want to say this about Smart's Georgia, he has clearly progressed Georgia from a top 8, top 9, top 10 team to a top 1, top 2, top 3 team. And that is a big, big gap in college football where you can go from 7, 8, 9, 10 to 1, 2, 3, 4 perennial year in and year out on those early, way too early polls. That's where Georgia's progressed. And I think Georgia fans are just going to be very thirsty and somewhat distraught until the Bulldogs break through and beat one of those 2 teams to claim their own national title.
Yeah, there's no doubt that Georgia has progressed. You laid out the ways in which it has, and there's no doubt it's got 2 big steps to take when it comes to Alabama and Clemson in the future. I think you're 100% right about that too. But, and I'm not trying to be negative, but honesty does compel me to admit that you just referenced a few guys whose NFL draft future will go a long way towards pointing to the development of Georgia along the defensive line. You mentioned Jordan Davis. You mentioned Malik Herring. You mentioned Brenton Cox. Well, Jeff, if memory serves, on G-Day, all 3 of those guys were playing on the red team, not the first-team defense. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anything necessarily, but in the case of all those guys, there may be some examples that Kirby and Trey Scott are pushing them and still asking for a little bit more. So I'm like you; those are potentially future pros. I guess Brenton Cox also depends on where ultimately ends up playing, but those are future pros. But as it stands right now, it sounds like there's an extra challenge being given, maybe to all those guys that you just mentioned.
Yeah. The defensive line room, and again, I keep coming back to even Tommy Mitchell is the guy that needs to be thrown in there. True 0-tech, true defensive tackle, nose guard for Georgia. He's the kid with the 25 to ACT. You've got Norton, you've got Logue, you've got Walker. All those big bodies are coming into Georgia. And you guys also got to remember guys like Tyler Clark, Mikhail Carter, and Julian Rochester. I mean, those guys are formidable NFL-type bodies. You saw where the defensive line had the most draft selections out of anybody, out of any single position this year for the NFL draft with 31. those guys, the Tyler Clark, I think that's one under the radar storyline for the 2019 season. Georgia needed Tyler Clark to play like he did at the end of the Rose Bowl, at the end of that stretch run of the 2017 season. If Georgia gets that Tyler Clark for the balance of the 2019 campaign, the defensive line starts to look a lot sportier. The same thing goes with Julian Rochester. He puts together a good shelf of film from his senior year, and all of a sudden Georgia's defensive line prospects and targets bubble way up. And you see all these way too earlys about 2020 draft prospects. That's a guy right there, Tyler Clark, David Marshall even in that group, Julian Rochester as well. If those guys can progress to all SEC consideration, let's not even call them All-American consideration, if those guys can get there, then some of those weaknesses that everybody points out when they look at Georgia's front seven last year will be covered up.
Yeah, that's very interesting to think about. Let's finish up with this. You mentioned the name earlier, Rakeem Jarrett, a receiver we've talked about a pretty good bit, does commit to LSU. In fact, I think we'll show that. We showed the commitment tweet yesterday. We can show it again if you'd like. Jarrett putting on the purple jersey, the white helmet of LSU to announce his commitment there. As you said, this is another receiver win for LSU after getting Jermaine Burton on G-Day. April 20th, he commits to LSU, and, of course, a whole host of really good receivers, Terrace Marshall, Jamar Chase, and others over the last couple of years. Jeff, it seems like this program always seems to win with receivers, but I'm more interested in the Georgia side of this thing. Was Georgia ever really in it for Jarrett? I know that he visited a good bit and seemed to talk up Georgia from time to time, but how much of a loss for Georgia should this be? And I reckon, as we said yesterday, it's also, I guess, semi-good news that he doesn't go to Tennessee, goes to a team at least that Georgia doesn't play every single year, but just kind of open-ended thoughts about Jarrett as it relates to Georgia.
Yeah, Jarrett's interesting. He needs a great quarterback to really make it do what he wants to do in college, and LSU needs to hit on a quarterback, maybe even a better quarterback than Joe Burrow was last year for the Tigers. I think with Georgia, they're getting a lot of those upper echelon quarterbacks that maybe LSU covets, but they need to get more receivers. I think context here is very important, Brandon. Rakeem Jarrett, I don't think has been a serious Georgia contender for maybe the last 4 to 6 weeks, maybe even longer. It seemed for a little bit of time that he was trending towards Tennessee. He wound up at LSU. That seemed like the school for him over the last 3 or 4 weeks. I think Jarrett was just one of those guys that had a fun recruitment, is what a lot of people on the forum like to label it. He's a guy that's going to see somebody every week. I think his girlfriend is going to go play basketball at Mississippi State. Somehow that school was even in the mix for the nation's number 2 wide receiver and a clear 5-star. Really fast, big body, over 200 pounds. Context and perception is really important here, because a lot of my information leads me to believe that Georgia values Justin Robinson as the biggest target in 2020 for its board, the way the Georgia classes view the board. And it's a lot different, Brandon. If you really want to go into deep discussions on Georgia's board, I get the feeling that Georgia rates guys like Laneith Whitehead and Trenton Simpson maybe a lot higher than a 5-star like Justin Flo, an inside linebacker. There's a lot of ways where this staff evaluates players a little bit differently than the recruiting industry does. And when you see there where Georgia has a Justin Robinson, who was one of its top targets, I think that says that the board is being fulfilled with what the coaches really want. Yeah, they don't have a 5-star or a budding 5-star like Burton. Yeah, they don't have a 5-star like Rakeem Jarrett in the fold. But I think Georgia, according to its calculations, is only going to recruit the talent it values the highest, and not based off the highest stars and rankings.
Really interesting stuff, Jeff. Thanks for giving it to us here on the Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. And for the folks who want more of that kind of insider update when it comes to the stuff happening at the tavern in your neighborhood, text the word Marlowe's, MARLOWS, to 24242. You can find out why around here we call it chef-inspired food with a twist. It is so tasty, and it's so much care goes into every item on the menu, including the craft cocktails as well. It's just a great time to relax, and date night or significant other, somebody you're trying to impress. Marlowe's Tavern is just a great place to do that, and there is probably a tavern somewhere near your neighborhood. So reach out and find out about the one that might be close to you by texting the word Marlowe's, MARLOWS, 24242. We're huge fans of it. We know you will be as well. Jeff, I'm also a huge fan of you. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow afternoon here in our studio for Before the Hedges. We'll have more recruiting talk then, and as I said before, I'll look forward to reading a bunch from you at DawgNation.com as well.
Yeah, guys, we'll have a couple recruiting updates hit the site today. a little bit about Andrew Rain, the talented offensive lineman out of Oklahoma. We'll see everybody in the DawgNation forum, and we'll also see everybody at a Marlowe's in your neighborhood as well. Take it easy, everybody.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Good stuff from Jeff Sentell, and I want to actually piggyback off of something that Jeff was saying there a moment ago when it comes to those two chief rivals for the Dogs right now, both in the recruiting trail and some of the stuff on the field. We'll do that coming up in just a moment. Before we get to that, though, let me remind you that each week here on DawgNation Daily, we talk about our friends at Online Trading Academy. I'm a big believer that sometimes it's important to think about what you want most, more so than thinking about what you want now. And when it comes to the things that you want most over the long term, it's the work that you do now that leads you to that success later on. You know, we're all interested in investing. We all want extra money in our pocket, but a lot of times the best decision you can make, and frankly, probably all the time, the single best decision you could ever make is the decision to invest in yourself. That's why I like Online Trading Academy. You know, they teach you how to make money in the markets. This is across a spectrum of asset classes, a variety of trading styles, both in the classroom and online. There are a lot of different ways to learn, a lot of different kinds of things to learn about, but you want to be taught by the experts at Online Trading Academy. So do this favor. Go to this website, tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. It's trading with a D, tradingacademy.com/Atlanta, and find out about how you can start making money in the markets. All right, so Jeff Sentell says, hey, you know, Georgia is carved out a niche that's better than everybody else. We actually talked about that on the show before Jeff joined us, that if you look at the overall pecking order of kind of where things stand in college football, and, you know, I know it's a tired argument by now, but I do believe at the end of the regular season, Georgia was at least the third best team in college football. It was. Now, should Georgia have been in the playoff or not at this point in time, I'm sort of ready to just kind of move off that and move on and worry about how Georgia makes the 2019 playoff. But at the end of last year, it was pretty clear there were very few teams in the country that were able to match what Georgia was doing on the football field. And as we get ready to start 2019 on the field, it also seems like the snapshot that we concluded 2018 with, well, it's right back one more time. Let me show you the tweet one more time we were talking about earlier in the show from the Las Vegas Superbook that Brett McMurphy had, where the odds kind of speak for themselves. Georgia, better odds than Ohio State, better odds than Michigan, better odds than Oklahoma, better odds than really anybody else by a long shot other than just Clemson and just Alabama. And these kind of recruiting wins that we talk about that kind of tie into a lot of that kind of stuff, it almost seems like you're not going to get over the hump with the Brian Brzezis and the Miles Murphys until you're beating those teams on the field. That team, Clemson in particular, get a chance to play them in a playoff and win that game. Antonio Alfano, Alabama, some of the the recruiting wins the Tide has gotten over the last couple of years that Georgia maybe would have liked to have had. Maybe it's finally slaying the dragon that is Nick Saban, that nemesis that Alabama's been for Georgia. Maybe that's what that's going to take. I'm going to talk more about that in just a moment. Let me see the tweet, though, one more time, though, because I do want to reflect on a couple of the other SEC teams that are on this. I think LSU at 25-1 is a very interesting pick, not because I think they'll win the national championship, but because I think the chances of them winning the national championship are probably better than 4%. That's about what 25-1 works out to be, about 4%. I think that the odds of LSU doing that are greater than 4, because I think the odds of LSU beating Alabama are at least better than 4%. If you can beat Alabama, you can beat everybody else. I have really changed my tune over the last couple of years when it comes to Ed Orgeron. At one point in time, I did not think he was a very good steward of the LSU program. As it stands right now, because of the recruiting success that Jeff was talking about, because what we've seen, from him on the field, and Georgia saw that up close and personal in October, Orgeron's actually doing a pretty good job at LSU, and at 25-1, they may represent a bit of a value play. I think it's really interesting that Florida and Texas A&M have the same odds at 40-1. I think A&M is way better than Florida. And I think that, frankly, in terms of realistic chance of winning the title, I don't think Florida belongs on this list. I don't know what A&M does because it plays such a difficult schedule, but it's a better team than Florida is. You see Auburn at 60-1. I don't think they're a national championship contender. I don't believe they're a top 10 team. But I believe they're a dangerous opponent for everyone. They are probably good enough to keep somebody else from winning the national championship. You got Mississippi State on this list at 80-1. That's obviously the kind of thing that could have been left out here. But when you look at LSU overall, I think that is a very interesting team. Not quite as difficult a schedule as A&M because they don't have to play Clemson the way that A&M does. They still got to deal with the rigors of the SEC West. But I think that LSU becomes a pretty interesting team to watch for. And I think it sets up for, if Georgia does win that Eastern Division one more time, is it a foregone conclusion that it's Alabama that'll play on the other side, or is there a chance that a team like LSU could make a little noise and surprise, or maybe A&M as well? That'll be one of the things that makes the fall really fun, and the speculation about that throughout the summer really fun as well. We'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, I want to kind of, before I get to the talk on what Kirby Smart said about Nolan Smith and Nakobe Dean, I do want to finish up on the point of comparing Georgia to Alabama and Clemson, because this is obviously a year that Georgia fans have been building up and waiting for quite some time. That, hey, 2017 was almost making the college football playoff earlier than some people would expect. That's not when people thought Georgia would make the college football playoff. They thought it might be more like year 3 or more like year 4, but it actually happened early. And now here we are back in 2019 again, with Georgia once again facing these massive expectations of making the college football playoff. But you got other teams, Alabama and Clemson, who are just as good as they've ever been. Well, what does all of that mean? Well, as Kirby Smart has explained, hey, don't worry about these stair steps towards progression. Don't worry about 2019 being the year. This is the year that's supposed to happen. As Kirby Smart has explained, this isn't about being on any kind of schedule. This is about going out and taking what you can and winning when you have an opportunity to. In fact, he told Georgia fans that very same point at the national championship game a couple years ago, that don't worry about the schedule. Just go out and try to win the game that's in front of you. Here's Kirby on that point.
I'll be honest with you, there's no schedule. I mean, they don't write a book on it and say, this time you got to be here and this time you got to be here. It's not really done that way. It's done each year independent of the previous. And this year's independent of last year, just like next year will be independent of this year. And you try to reshape your team based on the personality it takes on.
So from a talent standpoint, there's no doubt that Georgia's grown. It's more talented than it was in 2018. That team was more talented than the 2017 team was, at least on a composite basis, and way more talented than Kirby's first year in 2016. But you still got to go out and take it from the folks who've got the trophies that you want. And right now, Alabama's got that SEC trophy. Clemson's got that national championship trophy. And, boy, we're going to talk a lot about trying to knock off those two teams over the course of the next year. And a couple of the guys who might be able to do that are newcomers to the program. They are freshmen. They are freshmen with high expectations. And after one spring practice in the books and a G-Day where we got to see them with our own eyes, so far the results are about as good as would have been anticipated, with both outside linebacker Nolan Smith and inside linebacker Nakobe Dean. Jeff Sentell said this himself a moment ago, that when it comes to the pedigree for Georgia linebackers, that is the envy of the country. There may be a couple position groups where Georgia's still trying to work its way up the ladder on that, but linebacker is not one of those. In fact, after G-Day, where we saw a good bit of Nolan Smith, a good bit of Nakobe Dean, in some cases working with the starting unit on defense, Kirby Smart after G-Day offered his assessment of those guys. Here's what he said.
Their progression has been great. I think what you got to be careful of is, okay, well, why are they playing with the group they're in? Is it because of a lack of depth? Is it because of wanting to get the guys on the other squad more reps and making sure they grow and get reps? They're both very bright. They're both very sharp, intelligent, mature freshmen. But they have not been through a college football fall. They haven't been through a college football game. They haven't played in an SEC game. And they both got a lot of growing to do. But I'm pleased with where they are.
I think most grammar folks would tell you that anytime there's I think it's called an interjection in a sentence, the word but, maybe that's a conjunction. Anytime there's something like that in a sentence, that what happens before the but doesn't matter, it's what happens after the but. And Kirby Smart says, a lot of good stuff, but these guys haven't been through the rigors of the SEC yet. That is true. However, that's not going to do much to dampen expectations for Smith nor Dean. A lot of Georgia fans think they've seen some evidence that those guys can be major competitors. But to drill down a little further on the point of Nakobe Dean, at least, Kirby Smart says there is still a wide range of possible outcomes for what these guys may do this season. Dean in particular, here's what he said on that point.
His role could be as much as a starting linebacker, or his role could be as much as a special teams player this year. He could be a third down guy. It's going to be determined by the other players and himself, how much he grows and gets better. I can't really say to what he did or didn't do today. It was hard to tell.
So listen, I've said this before, that it has never been more difficult for a freshman player to get playing time at Georgia than it is right now. And that is, as much as we like to make the comparisons between these freshmen and maybe other freshmen that have come through at Georgia, the truth is if you are in not even a starting role, but if you're in a major playing time role on this Georgia defense right now, that means you're really, really good, because it's really, really hard to get that playing time for Georgia at this moment. So maybe in the case of Nakobe Dean and Nolan Smith, they are about to chart their own path. The truth is, even with Kirby saying those things there was not a lot of negative talk. There was not a lot of de-recruitment. He's not doing too much to water down the expectations. Georgia's defense could be very good this upcoming season, and there's a really good chance that two freshmen are two of the biggest reasons why. All right, let's get ready to wrap up this program today, and so good to have you with us throughout for it. Really good recruiting information from Jeff Sentell, and really excited about the offseason conversation that's going to go on over the course of the next few days, next few months, as we head towards that 2019 season, because figuring out how Georgia compares to Alabama and Clemson, the two teams that are still ahead of it, and figuring out how Georgia keeps the rest of the competition kind of there in the background. That's going to be a big part of the summer around here, not just on DawgNation Daily, but pretty much anywhere a college football conversation takes place. But in the midst of all of that, we also like reminding you that good Georgia fans are Gator haters, and Gator haters have reasons to rejoice. It's now been 913 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. Boy, isn't that a great way to close out a show, and a good reminder to anybody you may know who may be a Florida fan. Y'all have a great day today. We'll look forward to seeing you back here again tomorrow for DawgNation Daily. It'll be my pleasure to talk to you then. And on video, it's time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. In fact, let's keep the R.S. Andrews thing up there just for a minute, because I am going to have to try to very, very carefully here. In fact, I may need a little help. I got to plug in my computer. My computer's about to die. So we'll keep that up just for a second while I get my computer plugged in, and I'll remind you about my friends at R.S. Andrews, and then we'll take a bunch of comments. Heating, air, plumbing, electric, they are the ones you can trust. As I like to say, to play all the positions, they are truly the utility player for us here at DawgNation. And sometimes that means, just fixing something that's broken. Let's face it, sometimes the air conditioning is not quite working the way that it once was. You get a little bit of a tune-up on that. Sometimes that can also mean replacing a system, because these things do have a shelf life. After a while, it's time to get a new one. And whatever you are at in the life of your water heater or air conditioner, kind of anything like that, R.S. Andrews can know what to do for you. They are the ones that when you call them, they show up when you expect them to, and they do the work that was requested. There's no surprises with the price or anything like that. You will love R.S. Andrews, and please find them online at rsandrews.com. Now, with that said, I'm going to freak some of you out because my computer is going to be on the other side today as we get ready to take some comments, and we're all ready to rock and roll with these comments. Now, you can pull that off the screen. We'll be ready to go here. All right, so we will take a lot of your comments and kind of go through and do a lot of this kind of stuff together. So computer on the other side, because it's got a charge here, and I'll pull these up. In fact, it's going to end up being me who's more kind of freaked out about the computer on the other side. You get used to doing something the same way every single day, and it ends up being different, and it's kind of weird. I will say this also. We are going to have to get off the air something close to more on time than usual today. So for those of you who are typically with us much later, we've been going pretty late as of late. We can't go quite that late today. I've got a pretty important meeting to go to, which actually will lead later on. I'm not trying to, tease you and pretend I know something you don't know, but we got some fun stuff coming up around DawgNation this summer, and I've got a really good meeting on that today, and I hope to be able to tell you about that really soon. Dustin Goodwin says, why didn't UCF make the odds list? Yeah, I guess that tells you all you need to know about how the college football world views UCF on that. Chris Branham says, no, put it back. I'm assuming he doesn't want to see my ugly face anymore, which is probably understandable. Willie Gray Jr. says, please let Mullen be paired with Kirby Smart in the golf tournament they're in. So I guess we're probably coming up on that Chick-fil-A deal over there at Lake Oconee. Yeah, I wonder. I wonder how much fraternization you get between those two. Jennifer Caldwell Sperlin says, what is on time? At this point in time, we've gone so late for so many days. I guess I'm not even sure what the on time is even supposed to be anymore. When we originally started the show on video, the comments section was supposed to end at 11 a.m., but it's 11:04 now. We're just getting started. So we have definitely sorry. Mark Godfrey says turn the house to face the camera. So let me just put both these things on this side today, and it's going to be like a mirror image of our normal thing there. So there you go. Chris Branham says, "Don't let Connor tell me I'm not gorgeous." Yeah, you should hear the things these guys say about me when I'm not around. Mark Godfrey, actually, somebody says about the extension cord. Yeah, so there is an extension cord. The problem is the plug-in's like 100 yards from here, so actually the extension cord's working as well as it can work right now. Let me go over to the YouTube section here for a moment. We'll take some comments there and kind of get into anything anybody wants to get into. As I said off the top of the program, I was a little disappointed that the correlation between being a top 10 pick and producing wins for your college team is not higher than you might think. In terms of producing playoffs, producing big wins. A little disappointed there wasn't a stronger relationship between those two, but I still think it'd be good if Georgia did that nonetheless.
I will point out, so that 2010 Oklahoma team, Sam Bradford got hurt during the season and was not able to finish the season. They had to turn to
that makes more sense.
Backup quarterback.
Because in the 2008 season, they would have played for the national championship against Florida. Is that right?
Did.
Yeah.
I believe that team was the highest scoring offensive team in the history of college football.
Yeah, they averaged nearly 50 a game, right? So
they had no business being in that game because Texas was the better team. But
I don't even remember what happened. What happened in the?
Well, so some college football historian you are. Texas beats Oklahoma in the Red River game.
Okay.
That was when Texas Tech has its best season ever that year.
Yeah, that's back when Crabtree was the receiver.
The Crabtree game. Oklahoma then comes back, hammers Texas Tech like 2 weeks later. Turns out the tiebreaker for the Big 12 when there's a 3-team, 1-loss tiebreaker is BCS ranking. Oklahoma was ranked above Texas simply because Texas had a loss later in the year than Oklahoma did. Oklahoma goes to the Big 12 championship game, wins that, goes to the national championship game, lays an egg against Florida to give Florida another national title, whereas I believe if Texas had been in that game, Colt McCoy wins a national title.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely.
But didn't McCoy play pretty bad against Alabama the following year, though, right?
Are you serious?
I don't remember.
Colt McCoy got hurt in the first drive of the game.
I don't remember.
You're
I
getting
don't
old.
Remember.
You're getting soft.
I am getting old. However, there is something I remember about that era, and for the most part, I'm kind of critical of the Big 12, I guess. But that Texas Tech team that year that had Crabtree, a very good receiver, they probably played about the toughest 4-game stretch. I can't remember exactly all the teams they played, but Texas Tech, who was a top 10 team, probably the best team that Leach coached while he was there, I'm guessing. They had a stretch of like 4 games in a row against very good top 10 type teams. I mean, as much as I am sort of proud of the SEC schedules and things like that, there was a stretch back then where Texas Tech was running through a gauntlet. That's kind of an interesting era for the Big 12. It's a shame I don't remember it any better than I do because it was a pretty interesting era. Enrique Murillo says, "BA, where did you get that shirt?" This shirt came from my friends at the UGA bookstore. Thanks for asking, Enrique. So we do our post-game shows, things like that, from over at the UGA bookstore down the first floor. It's right next to the stadium. They've got all kinds of great apparel. And, boy, when it comes to comfort, it's hard to be more comfortable than this. Kind of a lightweight material I'm going to be outside a good bit today, so I wanted to wear something that, kind of breathes a little bit because, after all, there's a lot of sweat going on in this body, as I'm sure you could probably guess. So this is a very nice item from the UGA bookstore. Jacob Thompson says that Texas Tech team got smoked by Ole Miss in the bowl games. Still played a tough schedule, though. Enrique Murillo talking about shopping the UJ bookstore. Yeah, listen. There is never a time I go in there when I don't find at least 10 things I want to buy. And it's kind of funny. I took my kids in there for the G-Day game. They were at the G-Day game, and they were, kind of shopping around with me after the game was over with. And it's sort of funny, the apple, it truly does not fall very far from the tree because they are likewise looking at like 10 different things they want to buy. So my wife's got 10 things of her own. So I'm imagining business is pretty good for the old UGA bookstore because we all had a shopping cart full of stuff that we were interested in getting. Will Marlowe says, "B, are you ready for Knoxville to be respelled as Knoxville with 3 L's, LLL, after we beat them back to back to back?" I like that, Will. I think we should go with that. I think that's a very good idea. Very good idea. Cliff Payne, Crow King, talking about pass rushing. Cliff says, when it comes to pass rushing, he says there's so much more to playing in Georgia's complex defense. We'll see. I'm very high on Jermaine Johnson. Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that Jermaine Johnson looks like he could have a very bright future, too. Mark Godfrey says, BA, does Connor play air guitar to that music every day? I'm not quite sure if he does or not. I'm not quite sure. But on the subject of Georgia's defensive line, as I said to Jeff, when you look at those defensive linemen that go alongside the nose guard, because if you're a nose guard, if you're that kind of guy, seemingly you want to play a part of this Georgia defense because you're going to get high profile, you're going to get noticed, you're going to have a chance to develop yourself. But convincing that guy to stand next to the nose guard and convincing that guy to kind of fill the Jonathan Ledbetter role for Georgia, boy, those may be more difficult things to do, because one of the things you always see in recruitment is the players gravitate to what's viewed as more of a glamour position. Safeties want to be cornerbacks. Offensive guards want to be tackles. In the case of Justin Rogers, he wants to be a defensive lineman. Would-be defensive backs want to be wide receivers. There's just always this attempt to kind of trade up for what seems to be a more glamorous position. And defensive end in a 4-3 defense is a much more glamorous position. That's kind of the classic pass rusher that I grew up with back in an age when it seemed like everybody played a 4-3. That's kind of the glamorous position there. Also, the same way of if you could play in a 3-4, you think of yourself as the 3-4 outside linebacker. That really may be the most glamorous position on defense right now in all of college football. Convincing someone to do something other than that is just a tough recruitment. But that's the reason why we pay these coaches millions and millions of dollars, because you got to go out and do that. Double R says, it's been a lot of talk about Jermaine Johnson and Nolan Smith at outside linebacker. But R says, I really think that Adam Anderson could step up big this year. Obviously, I would think that's a possibility too, but this is one of those moments where honesty compels me to admit there was not a lot of Adam Anderson chatter coming out of spring practice this year, and that may not mean anything, or it may mean something. I honestly don't know. But there was a lot of silence to me around Adam Anderson. Kirby didn't mention him on his own, wasn't really asked about him all that much. Anderson was not on the black team defense for G-Day, which once again may be a false positive or just a false identifier all the way around. But when it comes to that situation, just pretty quiet on the Anderson front. This is after Anderson seemingly played a pretty good bit last year. Connor Riley, I'll invite you to join us back for this part again. I mean, am I missing something? Did Anderson's name ever come up this spring? Because I don't really remember it coming up one way or another. Maybe it's the jersey number switch. Maybe going away from 56 has cost him. But as it stands right now, there just wasn't a lot of talk about Adam Anderson this spring.
First of all, the jersey number had 0.0.0.0.
56 is a good linebacker number. 56 is a very good linebacker number.
There are a lot of guys at the outside linebacker position. Nolan Smith clearly had a good spring. Jermaine Johnson, he's someone who the coaching staff is very high on. Azeez Ojulari had a very, very good spring as well, which I don't think a lot of people anticipated coming into this spring practice. You have guys like Robert Beal there. You have guys like Brent Cox there, who even though they didn't have great springs particularly, they're still guys who've contributed and played at the position before. And you have Adam Anderson. There are a lot of mouths to feed at that position group, and some of those guys are just going to get squeezed out and not be able to find their way onto the field.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good point. That in some cases, this may not be a negative on Anderson as much as it is other guys have stepped up. Azeez Ojulari is clearly one of those guys. I mean, Kirby did talk about Ojulari pretty openly and glowingly at times during the spring, and Ojulari was on that black team defense. So if you just want to make that side-by-side comparison, based on those two admittedly pieces of anecdotal evidence, I think there's a pretty strong reason to believe that Ojulari is ahead of Anderson. That may not be a knock on Anderson. Ojulari may just be really, really good, and Jermaine Johnson, Nolan Smith are really hard to hold off. There could still be some room for Anderson to play. It would seem like that from a body type standpoint, Anderson might have a chance to fill a role similarly to what Walter Grant has filled for Georgia, where he's an outside linebacker that can also be a part of your pass coverage. When you want a big star in the game, for instance, and by star I mean fifth defensive back, when you want that guy to be a big guy, like Lorenzo Carter occasionally did for Georgia, Walter Grant has done some. From a body type standpoint, it seems like Adam Anderson would have a chance to do that, but that's a load to learn. My guess is there is a lot that goes into having to play that position, and I guess it's a matter of what they feel comfortable with Anderson doing those kinds of things.
bears repeating, we are still over 4 months away from Georgia's first game. There's going to be plenty of movement. Anderson has plenty of time to continue to get better and make an impression in fall camp and in the weight room and off season this summer. So, just because he wasn't getting his name called every other day during spring practice doesn't mean that he won't be a contributor or a player for Georgia's defense in the 2019 season.
Here is the other point, and I hesitate to say this, but it is just objectively true. At some position somewhere, somebody's going to get hurt. Now, obviously, I don't wish that on anybody. None of us do. But part of the reason why you build up the depth that you build is because at some point in time, you're going to subtract some of that depth by issues upon which you have no control. I mean, it's going to be one of these deals. We're going to be sitting here in August doing a show talking about, well, blah, blah, blah. I got hurt at practice yesterday, and that stinks, and I hate that. It's my least favorite thing about football, but it is going to happen at some point in time, and you just hope it's not a very serious injury when it does take place. But you can't be one of these teams that can only be good as long as nobody gets hurt. That's what 2014 Ole Miss was, I think. Ole Miss in 2014, the team that beat Alabama in Oxford, for instance, that team, when healthy, could play with anybody, but nobody stays healthy over the course of a full year. Once you start subtracting guys off that list, all of a sudden now you're losing some games late in the year, and so that's kind of what Georgia's doing. Matt Rukavina says, B.A. and Connor, did y'all all see UMass wide receiver Andy Isabella go the second round? We weren't wrong about him. Yeah, who drafted him? Was it Arizona that drafted him the second round?
I believe he went third round, if I'm not mistaken. 68th overall pick. Yeah, he was taken by the Arizona Cardinals.
So, I mean, that's kind of a neat thing to think about, the pairing of put Murray, put with Isabella. That should be a very interesting thing to see. And, yeah, I mean, Andy Isabella is just good. He was very, very good. Pro Football Focus, I want to say, had him. Did they have him as their top receiver in college football this past year? Certainly, they had him in the top 2 or 3, and he was very, very good. Gerald Rahman says, depth. We are going to wear teams out with our depth, and that is what the plan is, Gerald. I believe that's what the hope is for sure. Will Puckett says, I heard Kirby was bringing John Bell to the golf tournament as his celebrity guest. Long-time jamming dog. I think that Kirby's partner is David Dukes, not David Duke, but David Dukes. I think that's who Kirby's partner is. I think it's pretty much been Kirby's partner for kind of a long time, I believe. Golf is one of those things. There is another tournament that takes place in May as well. This is actually a celebrity pro-am associated with the PGA Tour Champions event that takes place in Hoover, Alabama every year. Golf is one of those things where I like to have a coach that's a pretty good golfer because you want a confident coach. I don't want my coach being a scratch golfer. Like Paul Johnson, for everything you want to say about him, Paul Johnson is a very good golfer. For my taste, too good. It's one of those things of I don't want my IT guy to be tan because if you're outside, you're not working on computers. There's a certain look that successful people have in certain fields. And listen, college football is hard work. There's a reason why Georgia Tech, until Jeff Collins came on board, hadn't signed barely a 3-star recruit in the last decade. Paul Johnson's out there working a short game. I can't have you shooting 73. I just can't. So I want Kirby to be somewhat good at golf. I want him to know what he's doing. I want him to be, willing to take the action that comes his way, pressing on some holes and things like that. I don't want my coach shooting 73, though. I want this on the record. A coach that's too good at golf is not good news.
I think you're just jealous that Paul Johnson is better at golf than you are.
No, he's way better than me. I mean, he's ace.
I think you wish you were as good at golf as Paul Johnson was.
I'd love to be, but I'm also not charged with recruiting and all that kind of stuff. You don't want your coach to be shooting 72. Johnson at this Chick-fil-A event at Lake Oconee, he's aced a bunch of holes. He's won the whole thing outright. And that tells you everything you need to know right there. You don't want to be the coach that wins this thing. It's sort of like I don't really know what. It's sort of like I'm trying to think of a perfect comparison. I can't really think of one. But the point is if you're out here doing this, you're not doing what you really need to do. You're not. So I want that on the record.
You want to talk about the big news of the show that I think you're pretty bummed out about and not saying out loud?
What's that?
Miles Murphy.
Oh, that's done. Yeah, that's over and done with.
I'm here to tell you it's going to be okay. It's going to be more than okay, Brandon.
I mean, But I've given up on this a long time ago. I mean, this is not news for me.
I don't know about that.
Listen, Jeff did his job, but it's important to point out the other day when Miles Murphy was talking, I'm not blaming Murphy for this. He should go where he wants to go. But when Murphy was asked about schools that he liked, he mentioned Auburn and Clemson on his own. Now, I told y'all this at the time, that Georgia came up in that discussion, the audio we've played on this show, and it's been on Before the Hedges. Georgia came up in that discussion because Jeff asked him about Georgia. Now, Jeff covers Georgia recruiting. It's his job to ask. But everything that Murphy said about Georgia at that time was only because of a question that he was asked about Georgia. So that interview for Murphy told me everything I needed to know right there. That, he talked up Auburn, he talked up Clemson voluntarily, he talked up Georgia and said really glowing things once he was asked about them, but he's not volunteering that information on his own. Georgia right now is not the kind of school that Miles Murphy feels like he needs to go to. And it's very similar to the Brian Brzee thing. And I'm sort of over it, and it's fine, but, I mean, it is an L. I mean, it's an L.
So let me take you back a year. Let me wind. I know he mentioned Popo. I'm going to mention another name here. Let's wind the clocks back a year. What was the position you were talking about a lot last year that Georgia, needed to see something out of?
Receiver.
Going in it?
Receiver.
I was going to go cornerback.
Okay, yeah, that's good. That's good.
Georgia, was tried to get into the Andrew Booth recruitment.
Yep.
Guy from Georgia, 5-star cornerback, played at Archer. Georgia couldn't get in on that. I bet if we checked the tapes, you were, pretty disappointed, saying, the same things you were saying now. It's an L for Georgia. It's the guy they needed to get. Clemson's able to come in here and land him. Georgia had a 5-star cornerback prospect coming in Tyson Campbell. And I know it was an up-and-down year for Campbell, but he played pretty well at the end, especially in the Sugar Bowl against Texas, and Eric Stokes emerged as well. Fast forward to this year, Georgia has a 5-star defensive lineman prospect coming in Trayvon Walker, and there are a couple other guys as well who could emerge. I know right now it seems dark, but I think Georgia's going to be A-okay missing out on a guy like Murphy, especially because the position that Murphy's ranked as and recruited as, that's not, it's just not what he's going to be when he comes to Georgia. He's not going to be a 3-4 outside line. He's not going to be the outside linebacker. He's going to be the guy on the interior. And he just doesn't want to be that, and he doesn't really project as that either. I think he's a guy who's best suited to be like a 4-3 defensive end like Sealan Farrell was for Clemson.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I guess the one thing that I would push back on is, your point about the defensive backs is an excellent one, but when it comes to the Owen Popo stuff, and I thought this was kind of a smokescreen at the time or exaggeration at the time, and there were plenty of people who would have said on or off the record that Georgia's got inside linebackers that it really, really likes, that Popo may not be, that big of a loss for UGA. And sometimes that kind of stuff ends up feeling like, wishful thinking or just revisionist history, I guess is the better way to say that. But as it turned out, Georgia really did feel like it had an inside track on Nakobe Dean. And maybe as a true inside linebacker, maybe from a body type standpoint, Popo was not necessarily a great fit for Georgia in that regard. So Georgia had other landing spots when Popo chose Auburn over UGA. But for this 2020 class, even if Miles Murphy's not the perfect position fit for Georgia in terms of, that's okay, there's another one out there who's just as good. As it stands right now, that's not the case. When you lose Brzee and Murphy, there is no consolation prize that would make you feel really good at that kind of position right now.
There's no consolation prize in terms of there being a 5-star. There are still very good players out there at the defensive line and the defensive tackle position that I believe Georgia is going to sign.
Yeah.
There just isn't that 5-star one that you love to praise and love to get because, that stands as a big recruiting win for the Georgia program and say, look at us, we landed this theoretical top prospect. Nobody was pounding their chest when Georgia landed Jordan Davis or when they landed Eric Stokes. But those guys were arguably incredibly important to the Georgia defense in 2018, and certainly more important so than some of the 5-star prospects that they were able to land and sign.
Eric Patton says these recruits just like 4-3 defense better, BA. So maybe that's the case, and, I think I like the idea of Georgia playing a 3-4. But as I said to Jeff, I think those the two defensive linemen that you put with your nose guard, I think convincing guys to want to play that position is going to be really tough. Really tough. If you're a nose guard, you're a nose guard. That's the one position where I don't think anybody says, I'm a nose guard, but I'd rather play some other position. If you're 330 pounds, you're for the most part going to play, that position. That's what you do. But the two other defensive linemen, that may be a little bit of a tough sell. It's kind of like on your little league team, sometimes it's hard to get guys who want to wear the catcher's gear because it's hot and you got to crouch down the entire game, and that's just not the most fun position to play. And in some cases, that may be what goes on. Being the 3 technique, being the 5 technique, that may be a little bit of a thankless job in a 3-4 defense.
Well, so Croking brings up a good point. What about a guy like Zykevious Walker? He's a guy we haven't talked a whole lot about, and part of that is because he's just not highly as rated as Murphy. Part of it is because where he is in the state, and he's not in a very populated area like, the Marietta where Miles Murphy is. Mm. So, I think Zykevious Walker, landing him, would still be a very, very good player. I believe he's a top 100 recruit.
Yeah, he had top 5 recent release. Georgia, of course, in that.
Yeah, maybe it's because he's always sort of seemed destined to go to Georgia that, landing him won't be, some big chest-pounding moment, but that's still a significant player that Georgia could sign along the defensive line that could help them, potentially early and certainly later on in his Georgia career.
Scott Harris wants to take some more comments. We shall do that. We've also got to get off the air in a second because I'm really going to have to go. So what we'll end up doing is taking a bunch more comments tomorrow probably. Croking also asked about Jordan Birch. He does visit for G-Day. I don't necessarily think there's a whole lot that's there with that. At this point in time, I don't think that Jordan Birch is necessarily a guy that probably has Georgia on his short list. I mean, I would think it's probably almost a given that he stays in state and goes to either South Carolina or Clemson. And this may be an example of, South Carolina has done well on the defensive line. It wouldn't surprise me if Birch ends up going to South Carolina instead. Isn't he from Columbia, I think?
He is from Columbia.
Yeah, so it wouldn't surprise me if that ends up happening. Philip Jordan Wells says an impactful defensive end in the 3-4 is often more difficult to find than people realize, and I think that's probably true. And I think part of that goes back to what I said before of if you could be a 3-4 defensive end, you have visions of being a 3-4 outside linebacker because that's just a more glamorous position. Or if you could be a 3-4 defensive end, you have visions of being the sort of the Clemson style, or I guess Auburn kind of runs a 4-3-2 as well. You have the visions of being that 4-3 defensive end because that could be a really glamorous position. Guys are going to be naturally attracted to where there's more glamour, and there are a lot of programs, where they'll say, "Hey, yeah, come here, you can play wide receiver," and spring practice begins of, why don't you just go try defensive back? Maybe a good chance to get on the field right away, and they stay at defensive back for their full career. There are a lot of programs going to tell a lot of recruits exactly what they want to hear. A lot of programs. Will Puckett says Lamont Gilliard will be joining Kyler Murray and Andy Isabella as well. Is that where Gilliard landed? Is he in Arizona?
He is Arizona as well.
But was he drafted or?
He was.
Okay.
First pick in the 6th round.
All right, good for him. Yeah, I think that Gilliard could have. I mean, you talk about a success story. To go from where Gilliard was as, kind of a converted defensive lineman to, starting center in the SEC and a really good one. And I mean, that's a really cool success story for sure. All right, we got to get ready to get out of here. We have had a good conversation. We'll take even more of your comments tomorrow.
Enrique Murillo asks why Jeff hasn't really talked about Kobe Pryor a lot. I think the reason for that is because Kobe Pryor right now does not have a committable offer from Georgia at the moment.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes, as far as I know.
Well, there you go on that. All right, so we'll get more of your comments tomorrow, and we'll have more fun. We'll also have Before the Hedges tomorrow afternoon as well. I got some big stuff doing today, and we'll be telling you about that in the days ahead here at DawgNation. That is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a great, great summer around here, and I cannot wait to get all of that started. So y'all have a good day. We'll see you tomorrow. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making this possible. They support us. They like the comments and the conversation we get to have, and they would love and they just like this kind of thing. And we think that if you like us, you'll like them as well. So please check them out online at rsandrews.com. They bring the R.S. Andrews cool down to us every single day. Air, heating, plumbing, and electric. They're the experts on all of those subjects. Y'all have a great day. We'll look forward to seeing you back here again tomorrow for DawgNation Daily.